Layout tools. Now, in the last presentation, we looked at some measuring and layout tools, and in particular, the focus was given to the tri-square, the framing square, and the sliding T-bevel. In this presentation, we want to be focusing primarily on layout tools. So at the end of the presentation, students should be able to explain at least two uses of a marking gauge, explain how a mortise gauge should be used to scribe lines parallel to the edges of a piece of stock, and explain at least two ways in which a brad awl may be used to scribe a mark on a piece of stock. Let's focus on the marking gauge. Now, the marking gauge is used in woodworking to mark out lines for cutting or other operations. The purpose of the gauge is to scribe a line parallel to a reference edge of or surface. It may also be used to transfer dimensions and to check sizes of the materials. The diagram on the right shows you how the marking gauge is used to scribe lines parallel to a reference edge or surface. Now, the gauge consists of a beam, a headstock, and a scribing or marking implement, typically in the form of a pin, knife, pen, or wheel. The headstock slides along the beam and is locked in place by either a locking screw, a cam lever, or a wedge. The marking implement is fixed to one end of the beam. Now, parts of a marking gauge. As the diagram depicts, we can see the stem, the headstock, the locking screw, the brass strips that is inserted in the headstock on the side that has direct impact with the stock to be marked. We also see the spur that is used for marking on the piece of timber. Now, marking lines with the gauge include adjusting the marking gauge to the desired measurement as shown. It also indicates the correct holding position and direction when scribing a line parallel to the edge of a stock. And as you can see, two methods are shown, or one method, two diagrams are shown as to how the marking gauge should be held when scribing lines. And notice that the direction of motion is away from the body, not towards the body, when you are scribing lines. And that's a safe way for using the marking gauge. Now let's look at the mortise gauge. This gauge performs similar in function to the marking gauge, but instead of one spur, it has two spurs. It is used for marking two lines as opposed to one that are parallel to the face or edge of a piece of stock. The mortise gauge is especially useful when marking out mortises and tenons and the pins and sockets of bridle joints. Here's a typical diagram showing the mortise gauge. It consists of the stem, the headstock, locking screw, a slide, thumb screw adjustment. We also see the adjustable spur. One is fixed and one is movable. One can be slide back and forth. And we also see the brass strips that protects the edge of the headstock from impact when scribing lines. Now, this diagram shows you the correct way to adjust the mortise gauge spurs when you are measuring the width of the mortise. So we can see the mortise chisel, the mortise gauge, and you can see how it is that the mortise gauge is set to the mortise chisel to get the correct width for marking on the piece of stock. Let's look at another measuring and layout tool known as a scratch or brad awl. The brad or scratch awl is used to scribe lines on the surfaces of materials. It is also used to mark points and to form starter holes for small screws or nails. As can be seen by the diagram, we're seeing the scratch awl being used to scribe lines on the surface of a material. and the diagram on the right shows you the handle of the awl, the shank, and the tip, as well as, for some versions, the ferrule that houses the shank. This ends my presentation, and these are my references. Thank you.